I'm just going to make a few concluding remarks and then we'll open for questions. So firstly, the point of the complexity of the phenomenon. We must be very cautious to simply make any one-dimensional conclusion with regard to farm attacks. So we've said frequently that if, for example, you were to say farm attacks are politically driven, that would be false. If you were to say farm attacks are not politically driven, that would also be false, because some of them are and some of them aren't. If you say, and it's the same with whether to say farm attacks is not motivated by labor disputes would be false. To say that they are motivated by labor disputes would also be false, because you would have to look at each incident individually. So there is a complexity to the problem, and we find that many people tend to simplify the problem to such an extent that it could lead to false conclusions. And one such false conclusion that has been emphasized recently is to say farm attacks are driven by socio-economic factors. It's true, some of them are, but some of them aren't. And that's why we decided to release this statistic for the attacks since the beginning of this year, where of the cases we know of, more than half of them, no money was stolen, despite in many of those cases the opportunity having been there to steal money. The attackers didn't steal money. And there's a lot of talk about the motive of farm attacks, and there should be a proper study on this. There has been some attempts to make conclusions as to why these attacks happen, or why do attackers or murderers commit these attacks. And we are concerned that the studies that have been done so far are flawed in terms of the methodology. And the biggest mistake you can make in trying to determine the motive in a phenomenon like this is to reduce it to a single cause. It's called the fallacy of a single cause. So there has been the study that has been quoted most frequently was done in 2003, and based on that, people frequently say that about 90% of farm attacks are driven by greed or the intention to steal. So what they did in that particular study was they categorized it as, what was the motive? Was the intention to steal, or was it labor related, or was it political or racially motivated, or was it motivated by, I think, intimidation? And the reality is that it could be all of them at the same time. So what tends to happen is, if a variety of motives are present and one of them is the intention to steal, then that's taken out and said, well, this was committed because the attackers wanted to steal something. You could commit a farm murder or a farm attack because you want to steal, and because there was a labor dispute with the farmer, and because you are a member of a particular political party or organization, and because you're a racist. All of those things could be present at the same time. And the biggest problem that we've had so far is attempts to determine the motive has always led to a reducing to a single cause. And it's the same with people saying that it's just socioeconomic factors driving these attacks. It's the same with people saying that it's racially motivated. It's the same with people saying it's politically motivated. The reality is that it's a complex phenomenon, and it should be acknowledged as such. What we are concerned about primarily is the climate that has been created in South Africa. The climate in which violence towards farmers is being romanticized by very influential politicians. And we can talk, of course, when we talk about politics, about political parties, we should differentiate between, for example, the ANC and the EFF. But it's not that simple to say, well, it's only the EFF, it's not the ruling party, because we've had, for example, Julius Malema making claims about slitting the throat of whiteness, and the comments about not calling for genocide, at least for now, and so forth. And he made recent comments on Twitter about farm attacks as well. And within this same time frame, we would hear, for example, the state president saying that he knows that Julius Malema is still a member of the ANC at his heart, and he must come home to the ANC after he made comments like this. So it's not just a problem that is linked to the EFF. And then lastly, I'm not aware of any other cause, to use that term, of which people who are opposed to that cause are so hell-bent on trying to discredit the cause. And we see it all over. We see it in South Africa, and we see it especially abroad as well, where people would spend hours and hours researching this phenomenon only to write op-eds or reports with very selective information, again denying the complexity of the phenomenon, and presenting people who want farm attacks to stop as being crazy right-wingers, for example, or as being conspiracy theorists, or as being people people who are just trying to convince everyone that there's a genocide happening in South Africa. There are very, very few people in South Africa who describe farm attacks as a genocide. And we've said, for example, repeatedly that it's not genocide. Although there are some serious problems, we've said repeatedly that it's a unique crime. It's different than other crimes. The same way that cash in transit heists are different. The same way that rhino poaching is different. And therefore there should be a focused counter strategy. So there would be small fringe groups saying this is a genocide, and then we would have mainstream commentators and people abroad. There was a recent article in the Washington Post, there's been articles in the New York Times saying, well, these are just a bunch of people claiming or screaming genocide, so don't take it seriously. And it's very disingenuous, and it's a distortion of the reality. The reality is that every reasonable person should be very concerned about this. And this is not to say that farmers are more important than anyone else. It's simply to say that this is a unique crime phenomenon, and there are many unique crime phenomenons in South Africa, and they are acknowledged as such. But when we're talking about farm murders, suddenly it becomes controversial, and there's a lot of pushback trying to say, no, we shouldn't acknowledge this as a unique crime or something that is deserving of a counter strategy. And that is what we are trying to combat at AfriForum.